Hi everyone, I am planning to learn Brazilian Portuguese as one of my languages for next year. And I'm here to show you what kind of resources, what kind of timeline, what kind of general plan I want to use in order to reach around a B1 in Portuguese in 3 months. So I'll first talk about my background with other languages because it is very relevant to how I'm approaching learning Portuguese. I have around a C1 in Spanish and Italian. So because of the very similar structures in Romance languages, as well as a lot of very similar vocabulary, including my native language, English, it is very important for me to kind of experiment with Portuguese this year, be using a lot more comprehensible input that is made more for an A2 level instead of starting at A1, because I want to just kind of see, right, what would it feel like to prioritize more comprehensible input over like learning from only a traditional textbook like I usually approach new languages with. All of my resources are going to cover some grammar, a lot of listening, pronunciation, and vocabulary. This is really the first time for me to not have a really structured base resource that I don't base my main learning off of. But again, I do want to speak as early as possible too. So I think that this approach is also going to help with that. The first thing that I love to actually do is have a lot of pre-exposure to the language before I actively study it, prioritizing learning languages in a really natural and low pressure way. And I've already been experimenting with this past month with Timely Learning, the sponsor of today's video. Timely Learning is a browser extension that swaps out a few words on the websites you already read with the foreign language equivalents. And the effect is that you start seeing new vocabulary and context throughout the day when browsing websites in your native language, without having to schedule extra study time. But Timely isn't only passive. They've also built interactive flashcards using spaced repetition to teach you the right words at the right moment. And their content covers around 10,000 curated translations from A1 to B2, all created with native speakers in several languages. And you can easily review words that you've seen while web browsing. It does feel structured, but it does also feel lightweight and something I can check in with for a few minutes every day without disrupting what I am reading completely. There's also progress tracking, which I have found very helpful, and it's very straightforward, showing you your vocabulary and how it grows over time. For a short-term goal like my Portuguese one, having those metrics makes it easier to see if I'm actually moving in the right direction. Now, in terms of grammar, the creators of Timely Learning are working to make it so users can easily look up verb conjugations and other grammar rules in the future. There's also a mode for inflected words, which you can switch on. So essentially, as you're browsing and encounter a new word in your target language, you can click on it and then click on Show Sentence, where you can see the words that are translated in the context of the fully translated sentences. At the moment, the browser extension supports English, German, French, Italian, Spanish, European Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, and Hindi, and they definitely have more languages on the way. Timely Learning is in the beta testing phase, so that means it is completely free to use, full access to everything as they refine their product based on user feedback. And if you want to join into the free beta testing phase, you can click the link either in the comments or in the description below. Another thing I really love to do as sort of a pre-exposure to the actual study phase is use Pimsleur. And probably from about lessons 1 through 3, I will start to use in this phase. I know that I'll be able to retain more words from my French, Italian, and Spanish background anyways. For month 1, which I call the warm-up phase, I'm going to be concentrating on a lot of comprehensible input at the A2 level and just kind of experimenting with how it goes. So the podcasts that I'm going to be using are mainly Easy Portuguese and the Felipe podcast, and those are just going to be done in my free time. Now in this phase, I will have already finished, again, lessons 1 through 3 of Pimsleur, so I will be working on finishing levels 4 through 5. And again, this is mainly just to work on my grammar and pronunciation. I feel like even besides having all of the really helpful similarities between the languages that I already know and Brazilian Portuguese, pronunciation is going to be the probably most important thing that I really nail down as early as possible. Now, after those 30 minutes of Portuguese with Pimsleur, I am also going to do about anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes, depending on what I feel, concentrating on grammar. And by grammar, I mean working on the verb conjugations, because that's a huge thing in Romance languages that I really want to get comfortable with. So again, I'll be alternating every other day between Closemaster, which is a great app. I have a whole review on it in the linked video above. That mostly helps me with vocabulary, and then I'll alternate that with, conjugemos, which is a verb sort of testing conjugation tool. Now, for about 30 minutes per week, only 2 days only, I'll probably do this on the weekends, I will devote to the book Comparative Grammar of Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and French. What I'm mainly doing is making sure that my brain is actively getting some study time in comparison of the grammar, because I think this is a part where when we are learning certain languages that are very similar to each other, we are afraid to mix them up. I share some of that fear, even though nothing bad will happen if we do tend to mix things up. And I think it's going to be really natural for me to start, especially mixing up Portuguese and Spanish at the beginning. But I think it's also important, and it's been proven as well research-wise, that our brains only have one place to store language, right? So we don't have a section for French, we don't have a section for Italian, and then a separate section for Spanish, right? As we build up our sort of arsenal and stockpile of language knowledge from different languages, they all get stored in one spot, which yes, can lead to a little bit of mix-ups here and there, but even more important for us to actually dedicate active time to comparing those languages and some of the sort of different structures in between them, so that we can grow that sort of cognitive intuition of how different languages work, even though they are really similar. And because we can start to intuitively understand these differences between similar languages, this will help us pick up patterns in general across other languages in the future, whether they have any sort of relationship to the languages we're learning now or not. Month 2, I'm calling the Activate month, where we increase output, because up until now, we've been mainly working on a lot of comprehensible input. Now, comprehensible input, my resources will stay the same. And again, I'm just going to do these whenever I have free time and feel like it, basically. And next, I'm still going to dedicate daily about 30 to 60 minutes per day, depending on my time and energy, to, again, switching in between conjugemos and close master. So for grammar versus vocabulary, for close master, I was using the 500 most common words collection. Now I'm going to up it to 1,000 in this month, while still working on the same sort of conjugations for conjugemos with the verbs. I am also going to, at this point, use the PDF for Teach Yourself Complete Brazilian Portuguese. And this is just to fill in any sort of grammar gaps that I feel that I am missing from either, comprehensible input. If someone says something that I don't understand why it's said that way, I'll probably just go in and see how it's talked about in that textbook. At this point, I'm also going to start building out my personal vocabulary list, especially as it pertains to talking about technology, as well as talking about travel, because I know that by the end of these 3 months, I'm going to want to talk about those topics to really test my conversation level in a class that I'm going to have at the end. So I'll keep a separate notebook for that and just kind of browse. I'm sure I'll pick up some of those vocabulary that I need while I am listening or reading in the textbook or anything like that. But as I start to fill in or notice gaps in my expression of those 2 main topics, I'll start to also just look up vocabulary through a dictionary, probably reverse of context in this case, so that I can memorize those words. I'm going to continue a little bit of comparative grammar study on weekends, and then what I'm going to do, which is really new, is I'm going to start talking early, 1 day per week, probably on a Saturday, just for 30 minutes with a Brazilian Portuguese teacher, just to keep on making sure that I am, as I've been working on pronunciation, produce those same sounds in a spontaneous conversation. I also want to start journaling with a really simple writing prompt that I will probably gather from ChatGPT, and then keep a separate journal so that on one side I write about this prompt, maybe 5 to 10 sentences in Portuguese, and then write the same thing in either Spanish, Italian, or French. And this is also going to really help me actively compare and contrast those languages in my mind. Because again, writing is a very active skill, but it still allows me more time to think through things, in addition to still using the comparative grammar textbook. Month 3 is going to be the activate and solidify stage. So on YouTube, I'm going to change my comprehensible input sources from what I was using for podcasts into, I think it's Brazilian Portuguese Speaking School and Easy Portuguese. So I can start to listen to natural Portuguese just from street interviews and how natives just normally speak. Again, I'll just do a lot of this input in my free time whenever I feel like it. I will still keep on having those 30-minute conversations on Saturdays only, as well as building out my personal vocab list, any sort of new words that I learn from my comprehensible input, but also as well from my classes. I'll continue with writing prompts in Portuguese, anywhere from 1 to 3 times per week, just depending again on how I feel. And then I'll do anywhere from, again, 30 to 60 minutes of Closemaster, this time working on the 2,000 most frequent words collection that they have. I will also then do about anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes working on the textbook of Teach Yourself Brazilian Portuguese, again, filling in any gaps that I feel like I need more work on. I'm planning to take just an online simple test for Brazilian Portuguese. I know that these are not legit and they don't measure all of the speaking skills, but it is something to do after I end my sort of 3-month challenge with the language. And as I mentioned a little bit before, I'm also going to have a 60-minute conversation only in Portuguese with my Portuguese teacher, and we'll be able to talk about, hopefully, travel, my past travel experiences, my present travels, and what I plan to do traveling in the near future, so I can kind of cover all of those tenses. I also want to talk about technology and how that impacts daily life, what I think that might entail in the future, etc., because those are two topics that I really like to talk about in any language. Instead of just saying I want to get to a B1, I actually have concrete goals that solidify what B1 means for me personally. So yeah, that is essentially my plan for 3 months. And then afterwards, I'm not going to go past any sort of like B1 material, just because, again, I'll be studying other languages and maintaining other languages at that point. Let me know in the comments below what you thought about this plan. I'd love to know, and I'll see you in another video soon.